Welcome to the Deathcast.
Saturday, April 12th, 1980. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walks from the cabin of her friends and neighbors, the Seabolt family, to the cabin she shares with her own family, number 28. It has been a typical quiet weekend as she steps into the rundown cabin, freezing as she beholds the sight before her. Her mother, Sue, lies on the floor, bound. It is obvious from the amount of blood present that she is dead. Nearby, her older brother, John, also lies dead. He is bound in a similar fashion. And near his body, John's friend, Greg. He too is dead. Her body awash in horror and terror, Sheila rushes back to the Seabolt house. He does his best to calm the young girl. He quickly ascertains that something horribly tragic has taken place and heads over to cabin 28 to see for himself. His concern for his neighbors is overshadowed by the fact that Sheila has told him there is other children in the house. James knows that he can't let the younger kids see what has happened to their mother. After sticking his head inside the back door for a moment, he heads around to the bedroom window and convinces Nick and Greg Sharp to join him, as well as their friend, Justin Smart. Of the other child he had been expecting to find, Sheila's younger sister, Tina, there is no sign. It won't be long before the campground where they all live, known as Keddie Cabins, is overrun by Plumas County Sheriff's officers, attempting to ascertain not only what has taken place, but who could possibly have committed such a gruesome, heinous act. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deathcast. I am your host, best-selling independent author Ian Totten, and I'd like to thank you for joining me once again. As you heard in that little trailer, we're going to be looking at the Keddie Cabin Murders that took place in April of 1980. But before we get into the case at hand, I'd like to remind everyone that if they enjoy this show, the best way to support it is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else it is that you find your podcasts. I can also be found on Twitter and Instagram at Author Totten. If you'd like to help support the production of this show, there's 2 ways to do that. You can find me on Patreon at Ian Totten or on Venmo and PayPal at Ian Totten. That would be for a one-time donation. Again, any support that can be given is greatly appreciated, as making this show is very, very time-consuming. Not only do I have to research the case for this week, but I'm also writing and recording the background music that you hear for every episode, while writing, holding down a full-time job, and helping to raise a family. Alright, the plugs are out of the way. Grab yourself something to drink. I have my coffee and cigarettes. Let's go into the crypt. The Keddie murders are a rather infamous case, and it's one of the cases that I find the most fascinating. In fact, when my family and I were preparing to move back from Northern California to our current location, we contemplated stopping in Keddie and seeing the crime scene, only to find out that the cabins had all been torn down and that the area was now blocked from people coming and visiting, ghoulish curiosity seekers. So we were not able to. But the area we were living in California has two ties to this case that I will get into when we reach those points in the case. This is a fairly complex, unsolved murder. There has been a lot of media coverage of the murders throughout the years. Within the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot more coverage as new breakthroughs in forensic science and new people joining the Plumas County Sheriff's Office have taken another look at the case. But we're going to start at the beginning with what the police found. When they arrived on the scene, the Plumas County Sheriff's Department found a fairly vicious scene. Glenna Sue Sharp was found lying on her side near the living room sofa. She was wearing a shirt but was nude from the waist down. She had been gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been secured in place with tape. Sue had been stabbed in the chest and her throat was cut. There was a mark on the side of her head from a Daisy Model 880 BB gun, which the fact that there was a mark left from the BB gun should give you some idea as to the viciousness of the attack. You really would have to slam someone in the side of the head with a BB gun in order to leave a visible impression there. Her 15-year-old son, John, had his throat cut. There were also defensive wounds visible on the boy, and his friend Dana Windgate had multiple head injuries and had also been manually strangled. They also discovered that all three victims had blunt force trauma wounds to their head, and they quickly ascertained what had caused this. They found a bloody hammer on scene, as well as 2 knives, one of which was a steak knife that had been bent in half from the force of the blows that it had inflicted. Blood splatter evidence, which is something that crime scene investigators use to determine where and from what angle an attack took place, showed them that all 3 of the murders had taken place in the living room. There was a lot going on with this crime scene. Unfortunately, though, it really was not contained by the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. The first man on the scene was Deputy Hank Clement, and he went inside and confirmed that everybody inside was deceased. He was soon joined by Sergeant Jerry Shaver, who spent his time questioning people outside. At some point, the 2 men went into the house and did a quick walkthrough before Sheriff Sylvester Doug Thomas and Assistant Sheriff Ken Shanks came. They were soon joined by another man named Don Stroy, and from what I can ascertain, the 5 of them continuously trampled through the house before they ever thought to call and have a crime scene photographer come. They did do a house-by-house welfare check to see if anyone else had been assaulted during the previous evening. They also interviewed potential witnesses, a few of whom stated that their animals had been acting oddly the previous evening. One individual also stated that they saw the back door light on outside of cabin 28 around 4 a.m. And here's where things get pretty odd. The police did not notice that Tina Sharp was missing until hours after they arrived at the scene, at which point they contacted the FBI, who came in to help investigate Tina's disappearance. Sadly, though, they were only involved for about 2 weeks before turning the case back over to the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department. As for the house itself, the bodies had been restrained using medical tape as well as extension cords and cords that had been cut from appliances within the house. There were also large pools of blood with drag marks coming out of them, which told the sheriff's department that the killers had taken their time in the attack. It wasn't something where they had come in and been frenzied about it. They had taken their time with the act that they were committing, to the point that Sheila and one of the boys had blood on their feet, which told the investigators that both of them had been marched through the pools of blood at some point during the assault. They questioned Sheila about the medical tape that had been used to bound the victims, and she stated that it was not tape that had been inside the house, which meant that the killers had brought it with them, so they began to suspect that this had been a premeditated murder. Something of interest that came up once the autopsy had been completed was that Dana Windgate had been bashed in the head with a hammer different than the one that had been found on the scene. At the time, they had no idea what this hammer was, what it looked like. They just knew that there was another murder weapon that wasn't accounted for. Some other evidence that was found on the scene were drops of blood on Tina's bed, a bloody footprint in the yard, as well as knife marks throughout the home, as though somebody had walked through the house stabbing the walls. The sheriff's department assumed almost from the start that 2 men had been involved in the murders, and as they talked to the people living up at Keddie Cabins, they quickly learned that a gray van had been seen sitting in front of the Sharp household around 9 o'clock, while others stated that they had seen a Datsun sitting in front of the house in that same time frame, although the Datsun appeared to have been sitting on a flat tire. Investigators believed that the people who perpetrated the murder had worn gloves because, other than the one bloody fingerprint, there were no fingerprints or any other discernible DNA left in the house. So the things that we always see them doing in television shows, like finding fiber transfers, hair, skin cells, that kind of stuff, none of that was collected at the scene until much later. In the 80s, when the sheriff's department decided to see if they could find any DNA evidence on the things they had already collected. So the police really didn't have a lot to go on. Supposedly the Plymouth County Sheriff's Office